Experts enhanced this 1858 photo and discovered it was used to justify the auction of a child slave. Dr. Sarah Mitchell had examined thousands of Civil War-era photographs during her 20-year career as a historical archivist at the Smithsonian Institution, but nothing had prepared her for what she was about to uncover on that cold February morning in 2023. The photograph arrived in a sealed envelope from a private estate sale in Charleston, South Carolina, part of a collection donated by the descendants of a prominent merchant family. It was labeled simply, Daguerreotype, circa 1858, unidentified subjects. Sarah carefully removed the delicate image from its protective casing and placed it under the examination lamp. The photograph showed what appeared to be a formal portrait, a well-dressed white man in his 50s standing beside a young black girl, perhaps 7 or 8 years old, wearing a simple cotton dress. The composition seemed ordinary for the period. Wealthy Southern families often commissioned portraits with enslaved individuals as displays of property and status. But something about this image felt different. Sarah noticed the girl's eyes, wide, fearful, staring directly into the camera with an expression that seemed to pierce through time itself. The man's hand rested possessively on the child's shoulder, and his expression carried an unsettling mixture of pride and cold calculation. Sarah felt her stomach tighten as she studied the photograph more closely. She decided to use the archive's newly acquired digital enhancement technology, a sophisticated system that could reveal details invisible to the naked eye in historical photographs. As the high-resolution scan processed, Sarah sipped her coffee and reviewed the provenance documents. The envelope contained only minimal information. The photograph had belonged to Thomas Whitmore, a Charleston merchant who died in 1889. When the enhanced image appeared on her screen, Sarah's coffee cup slipped from her hand, shattering on the floor. There, barely visible in the original but now crystal clear in the enhancement, was text painted on a wooden sign partially visible in the background. The words made her blood run cold. Sarah's hands trembled as she adjusted the contrast and brightness on her monitor, hoping she had misread the enhanced text. But the words remained unchanged, stark and undeniable. Prime young girl, excellent health, auction, Feb 14, 1858. The sign had been deliberately positioned in the photograph's background, partially obscured but intentionally present. This wasn't just a portrait, it was documentation, a sales advertisement captured in permanent form. She immediately called her colleague, Dr. Marcus Freeman, a specialist in antebellum Southern economic history and descendant of formerly enslaved people from Virginia. Marcus arrived within 30 minutes, his expression grave as Sarah showed him the enhanced image. He studied it in silence for several long moments, his jaw clenched. "This is documentation of a crime against a child," he said quietly, "and someone wanted to preserve it, probably as proof of ownership or a record of transaction." Together, they began examining every detail of the photograph with forensic precision. The daguerreotype process, they knew, had been expensive in 1858, costing the equivalent of several $100s in today's currency. Someone had invested significant money to create this image. Why? Marcus pointed to the girl's dress. "Look at this," he said, zooming in on the fabric. "That's not typical plantation clothing. It's clean, relatively new. She was dressed up for this photograph, staged to look presentable for potential buyers." Sarah noticed something else, a small piece of paper pinned to the girl's dress, similar to modern price tags. Under extreme magnification, they could make out partial text, "height years, good tempera, no defects." The clinical language describing a child as merchandise made Sarah's eyes burn with tears. This wasn't just historical documentation. It was evidence of the commodification of childhood itself. They spent the next several hours cataloging every visible detail: the type of chair the man sat in, the style of his clothing, the architectural features visible through a window in the background. Each element would help them identify the location and potentially the individuals in the photograph. Marcus suggested they reach out to genealogical databases and historical societies in Charleston to identify Thomas Whitmore and trace the photograph's origins. As evening approached, Sarah made a decision that would change the course of her career. She would dedicate herself to uncovering the complete story behind this image, to restoring identity and dignity to the nameless child whose suffering had been so callously documented. "She deserves to be remembered as more than property," Sarah told Marcus. "She deserves her name back." The following week, Sarah and Marcus traveled to Charleston, South Carolina, carrying digital copies of the enhanced photograph and letters of introduction from the Smithsonian. Their first stop was the Charleston Historical Society, housed in a renovated antebellum mansion that had itself witnessed the horrors they were researching. The irony wasn't lost on either of them as they climbed the marble steps where enslaved people had once labored. Archivist Eleanor Washington, a Charleston native in her 60s, greeted them with professional warmth that shifted to visible discomfort when she saw the photograph. "Lord have mercy," she whispered, removing her reading glasses to wipe them clean, as if hoping the image might change. "I've seen many difficult documents in my years here, but this—" She paused, composing herself. "This is particularly heartbreaking. Let me see what we have on Thomas Whitmore." Eleanor led them into the climate-controlled records room, where centuries of Charleston's history lay preserved in leather-bound volumes and acid-free boxes. She pulled several ledgers from 1857-1859, including property tax records, business licenses, and, most significantly, auction house registries. Thomas Whitmore's name appeared frequently. He wasn't just a merchant. He was a prominent slave trader who operated one of Charleston's largest auction houses on Chalmers Street. Marcus photographed page after page of records, his face an impassive mask that Sarah had learned to recognize as his way of processing deep emotion. The ledgers documented hundreds of sales, each entry reducing human beings to inventory. One Negro woman, age 22, with infant. One Negro man, age 35, field hand. One Negro girl, age 8, house servant. The clinical language appeared again and again, transforming people into products with market valuations. Then Eleanor found it, an entry dated February 14, 1858, in the Ryan's Auction House Registry, operated by Thomas Whitmore. Item 47, Negro girl, 8 years, named Clara, sold to J. Caldwell, Edgefield District, $650. The date matched the sign in the photograph. The description matched the child's apparent age. Sarah felt her throat constrict. After 165 years, the nameless child had a name, Clara. But the discovery raised as many questions as it answered. Who was Clara before she became Item 47? Where had she come from? What had happened to her after the sale? And most troubling, why had Whitmore commissioned such an elaborate photograph to document this particular transaction? Eleanor suggested checking the records of J. Caldwell in Edgefield District, now Edgefield County, several hours inland. If Clara was sold to him, there might be plantation records, estate documents, or even, if we're fortunate, manumission papers from after the war. The drive to Edgefield took Sarah and Marcus through the South Carolina landscape where cotton had once been king, past fields that had been worked by enslaved hands, through small towns still grappling with their complicated histories. They arrived at the Edgefield County Historical Museum on a humid afternoon, where curator James Patterson had agreed to meet them after hours to review sensitive materials. James, a white man in his early 70s whose family had lived in Edgefield for 6 generations, had spent the past decade working to document and acknowledge the county's participation in slavery. "My own ancestors owned enslaved people," he told Sarah and Marcus as he unlocked the archive room. "I can't change that history, but I can help make sure it's told truthfully. What you're doing for this child, for Clara, matters." The Caldwell plantation records were extensive and meticulously maintained, which James explained was typical of wealthy planters who viewed their enslaved workforce as crucial business assets. They found James Caldwell's purchase records for 1858, confirming the acquisition of girl Clara for $650 on February 14th. But there was more. Attached to the entry was a notation that made Sarah's heart race. Purchased on commission for medical study, Dr. H. Morrison, Charleston. Marcus looked up sharply. Medical study? An 8-year-old child? The implications were horrifying. During the antebellum period, enslaved people, including children, were frequently used as subjects for medical experimentation, their bodies considered property that could be utilized without consent. Dr. Josiah Knott and Dr. Samuel Cartwright were among many physicians who built careers conducting painful experiments on enslaved individuals, developing racist pseudoscientific theories about biological differences between races. James pulled out additional correspondence files, finding several letters between Caldwell and Dr. Harrison Morrison, a Charleston physician. The letters, written in elegant cursive, discussed Clara in clinical terms: her unspoiled physiology, her pure specimen quality, and her suitability for anatomical demonstration, and physiological observation. One letter from Morrison to Caldwell, dated March 1858, chilled them all. The girl Clara has proven satisfactory for my purposes. Her docility and youth make her ideal for demonstrating theories to my medical students. The photograph provided by Mr. Whitmore was instrumental in my decision to acquire her. The photograph hadn't just documented a sale, it had been a marketing tool, specifically created to facilitate Clara's acquisition for medical exploitation. Sarah felt physically ill. "We need to find out what happened to her in Morrison's custody," she said, her voice tight with controlled anger. "And we need to find any descendants who might exist. Clara's story needs to be told, but it needs to be told right, with dignity, with context, and with justice." Back in Charleston, Sarah and Marcus approached the Medical University of South Carolina, which had absorbed the records of several defunct medical schools from the antebellum period, including the private medical college where Dr. Harrison Morrison had taught. The university's archival access was complicated by privacy concerns and the sensitive nature of historical medical ethics violations, but Sarah's Smithsonian credentials and Marcus's reputation as a respected historian eventually opened doors. Dr. Patricia Chen, chair of the university's Medical History and Ethics Department, met with them in a secure viewing room. An Asian American woman whose own family had experienced discrimination in medical settings, Patricia had dedicated her career to examining medicine's dark history of exploitation. "We've documented dozens of cases where enslaved people were used without consent in experiments and demonstrations," she explained. "It's a painful but necessary history to acknowledge and study." The Morrison collection contained lecture notes, anatomical drawings, and a daily log Morrison maintained from 1855 to 1862. Sarah's hands shook as she turned the pages to 1858, finding the first entry mentioning Clara. March 3, 1858. Received the Negro child Clara from Caldwell. Subject is in excellent physical condition, properly docile, responds to instruction. Will utilize her in Tuesday's lecture on physiological responses to pain stimuli and developmental anatomy. The entries continued through spring and summer of 1858, describing Clara's presence at medical demonstrations, her reactions to various procedures, the observations Morrison recorded about her physical and emotional responses to his experiments. The clinical detachment with which Morrison described inflicting pain on a terrified child was almost unbearable to read. Marcus had to step outside twice to compose himself. But then, in August 1858, the entries changed tone. Morrison wrote, August 17th, "The child Clara has fallen ill with fever. Have suspended demonstrations. Her condition deteriorates despite treatment. Note, she cries frequently for her mother, asking for Mama Ruth. The emotional distress may be contributing to physical decline." Several days later, August 24th, Clara remains fevered. She speaks of her mother, a woman named Ruth who worked in the rice mills. The child was separated from her mother at age 7. I find myself unexpectedly troubled by this information. Then, a remarkable entry dated September 2nd, 1858. "Clara's fever has broken, but I have made a decision that may damage my reputation among colleagues. I cannot continue this work with this particular child. Her humanity has become too evident to me. A failure of scientific objectivity, perhaps, but a necessary acknowledgement of my own humanity as well. I have contacted the American Colonization Society regarding her possible manumission and relocation. If I cannot restore her to her mother, perhaps I can give her freedom." Patricia looked up from the documents, her eyes bright with tears. "This is extraordinary." Morrison's conscience was awakened. It doesn't excuse what he did to Clara, but it might have saved her life. The American Colonization Society, founded in 1816, had a complex and controversial history. Ostensibly created to help formerly enslaved people relocate to Africa, specifically to Liberia, a colony established for this purpose, the organization's motivations were mixed. Some members genuinely believed in providing freedom and self-determination. Others simply wanted to remove free black people from America to preserve slavery and white supremacy. For Clara, however, the society represented an unexpected path to freedom. Sarah contacted the Library of Congress, which held the society's records, and arranged for digital access to their passenger manifests and correspondence from 1858-1859. Working late into the night from her apartment, Sarah searched through hundreds of scanned documents looking for any mention of Clara or Morrison. Finally, at 2 in the morning, she found it. A letter from Morrison to the Society dated October 15, 1858. In the letter, Morrison requested assistance in securing passage to Liberia for a young girl of African descent, approximately 8 years of age, currently in my custody. He offered to pay her passage and provide a small endowment for her care upon arrival. Notably, he didn't mention his experiments or the circumstances of Clara's acquisition, presenting himself instead as a benefactor helping an orphaned child. It was self-serving, certainly, but it might have represented Clara's only chance at freedom. The Society's response, dated November 3, 1858, confirmed acceptance of Morrison's proposal. Clara was scheduled to sail on the ship Liberia Packet, departing Charleston on January 12, 1859, bound for Monrovia. The passenger manifest, which Sarah located after another hour of searching, listed Clara, age 8, Negro girl, sponsored by Dr. H. Morrison, Charleston, among 47 other emigrants. But here the documentary trail appeared to end. Ship manifests confirmed the Liberia Packet's arrival in Monrovia on March 8, 1859, but there were no records indicating what happened to the passengers after disembarkation. Had Clara survived the voyage? Had she built a life in Liberia? Had she ever learned what happened to her mother, Ruth? These questions seemed unanswerable across the gulf of 165 years and an ocean's distance. Marcus suggested reaching out to the Liberian National Archives and genealogical societies in Monrovia. It's a long shot, he admitted, but Americo-Liberian families, descendants of African Americans who emigrated there, often maintained detailed family histories and records. If Clara survived, if she had children, there might be descendants who know her story. Sarah composed a careful email to the Liberian National Museum, attaching the photograph and explaining their research. Then she waited, hoping for a miracle across the miles. 3 weeks later, Sarah received a response that made her cry at her desk. The email came from Josephine Williams, a genealogist and educator at the University of Liberia in Monrovia. Dr. Mitchell, Josephine wrote, your inquiry has reached the right person. The photograph you sent has been shared within Monrovia's Americo-Liberian community, and I believe I have found Clara's descendants. A family named Thompson has maintained oral histories describing an ancestor named Mother Clara, who arrived from America as a child in 1859. They have been seeking information about her origins for generations. Sarah immediately called the number provided. Josephine answered on the second ring, her voice warm and professional, tinged with excitement. Dr. Mitchell, this is an extraordinary discovery. The Thompson family is one of our respected elder families. Mother Clara, as she's known in their family stories, married a man named Samuel Thompson in 1867. She lived until 1923, dying at approximately 73 years old. She had 6 children, and her descendants now number over 200 people across Liberia and the United States. But what captured Sarah's breath was what Josephine said next. Mother Clara told her children and grandchildren about her life in America. She spoke about being taken from her mother Ruth, about the cruel doctor who later set her free, about the ship that brought her to Liberia, and she gave her descendants a mission, to remember that she was once considered property, once bought and sold like merchandise, so that they would always fight for human dignity and freedom. Josephine had arranged for Sarah and Marcus to speak via video conference with several of Clara's descendants, including 92-year-old Grace Thompson, Clara's great-great-granddaughter, who had been told stories directly by Clara's daughter before she died. The video call was scheduled for the following week, giving Sarah time to prepare a presentation of everything they had discovered: the photograph, the auction records, Morrison's medical logs, the ship manifest, and the documentation of Clara's sale and exploitation. Marcus spent those days researching rice mill operations in South Carolina in the 1850s, hoping to find any trace of Clara's mother, Ruth. He discovered that several large rice plantations near Charleston had employed enslaved women in their milling operations. Dangerous, exhausting work that had a high mortality rate. But finding a specific woman named Ruth among thousands of enslaved people who had left little documented trace of their existence seemed nearly impossible. Then, 2 days before the scheduled video conference, Marcus made a breakthrough. In the records of the Middleton Place plantation, he found an 1857 estate inventory that listed Ruth, age 28, rice mill worker, with daughter Clara, age 7. The following year's inventory listed only Ruth, age 29, rice mill worker. The daughter had vanished from the records, sold away as so many children had been, separated from their mothers in transactions that destroyed families for profit. The video conference was scheduled for 10 a.m. Eastern Time, 3 p.m. in Monrovia. Sarah and Marcus sat in a small conference room at the Smithsonian, their hearts racing as the connection established. The screen filled with faces. 12 members of the Thompson family had gathered at the University of Liberia to participate, spanning 4 generations. In the center sat Grace Thompson, her white hair wrapped in an elegant headscarf, her dark eyes sharp and alert despite her 92 years. Josephine Williams made introductions, and then Sarah began presenting their findings. She showed the original photograph first, unenhanced, explaining how it had come to the Smithsonian. Then she showed the enhanced version, revealing the auction sign and the text on Clara's dress. She heard gasps and murmurs from Monrovia. Grace Thompson leaned forward, studying the image of her great-great-grandmother as a terrified child, and tears streamed down her weathered face. "That's her," Grace whispered, her voice carrying clearly through the speakers. "That's Mother Clara. I've heard about this photograph my entire life. She told my grandmother that a man had taken her picture before she was sold, that she had been dressed up like a doll and made to stand still while people looked at her like she was an animal. She said she prayed to God that someday someone would see that picture and know what had been done to her, that someone would remember her as a person, not property." Sarah continued the presentation, walking them through the auction records, the sale to Caldwell, Morrison's medical experiments, and Clara's eventual liberation and journey to Liberia. She spoke carefully about the medical records, acknowledging the horrific nature of what Clara had endured while respecting the dignity of everyone on the call. The family listened in stunned silence, many crying openly. When Sarah finished, Marcus shared his discovery about Ruth, Clara's mother. "We found her," he said quietly. "We found Clara's mother in the Middleton Place plantation records. She was a rice mill worker. After Clara was sold, Ruth remained enslaved there until at least 1860, when the records we have access to end. We don't know what happened to her after that, whether she survived the war, whether she gained freedom, whether she ever learned that Clara had been freed and sent to Liberia." Grace Thompson spoke again, her voice stronger now. "Mother Clara spent her entire life wondering about her mama. She told us that her greatest sorrow was never knowing if her mother had survived, if she had ever been free, if she had ever forgiven Clara for being taken away, as if a 7-year-old child could have prevented it. Mother Clara devoted her life to education and justice in Liberia because she said no other child should ever be bought and sold like she was. She founded schools, she fought for women's rights, she worked until the day she died to make sure her story mattered." In the weeks following the video conference, Sarah and Marcus worked with the Thompson family and Liberian historians to piece together Clara's remarkable life after arriving in Monrovia. The 8-year-old girl who had been photographed as merchandise, who had survived medical exploitation, who had crossed an ocean alone, had transformed her trauma into a life of purpose and meaning. Clara had been taken in by a missionary family upon arrival in Liberia, receiving education, something denied to most enslaved people in America. She learned to read and write, studied literature and history, and by age 16 was teaching younger children. In 1867, at age 17, she married Samuel Thompson, a carpenter and son of immigrants from Virginia. Together, they had 6 children, 3 daughters and 3 sons, all of whom received education and became teachers, ministers, and community leaders. But it was Clara's work founding schools that became her greatest legacy. Starting in 1875, she established a school for girls in Monrovia, believing that educating young women was essential to breaking cycles of exploitation and powerlessness. By 1900, her school had educated over 300 girls, many of whom went on to become Liberia's first generation of female teachers, nurses, and activists. Clara named the school Ruth's Hope, in honor of the mother she never forgot. Josephine Williams sent Sarah copies of documents from Clara's school, including a mission statement written in Clara's own hand in 1876. "I was once considered nothing more than property, valued at $650, my body and mind treated as merchandise to be used and disposed of at will. But I was always a human being, a child of God, a daughter who loved her mother. This school exists to ensure that every girl who enters these doors knows her infinite worth, knows that she can never be reduced to property, knows that her mind and spirit are her own. In teaching them, I honor my mother Ruth, who never stopped being my mother even when we were torn apart." The Thompson family shared photographs of Clara from later in her life, a dignified woman in Victorian dress, surrounded by her students, her expression conveying both strength and compassion. Looking at these images alongside the 1858 photograph of the terrified child, Sarah felt the weight of history and the power of human resilience. Clara had not just survived, she had transcended her exploitation to create lasting change. Marcus discovered one final document that brought the story full circle. In 1918, at age 68, Clara had written a letter to the American Freedmen's Bureau, which had been established after the Civil War to help formerly enslaved people. In the letter, Clara inquired about any records of a woman named Ruth who had worked in the rice mills near Charleston, describing her mother in detail and expressing hope that she might still be alive or that descendants might be found. 6 months after discovering the photograph, the Smithsonian Institution held a special exhibition titled, "From Property to Person, The Story of Clara." Sarah and Marcus had curated a powerful display that included the original and enhanced photographs, the auction records, Morrison's medical logs, ship manifests, Clara's letters and writings, photographs of her school, and testimonies from her descendants. The exhibition opened with a live video connection to Monrovia, where the Thompson family participated in the dedication ceremony. Grace Thompson, now 93, spoke from Liberia. "My great-great-grandmother Clara was photographed as a child to help sell her as property. Today, we honor her by showing that same photograph in one of America's greatest museums, not as a relic of shame, but as a testament to her strength and humanity." Mother Clara always said that truth was more powerful than hatred, that memory was more powerful than forgetting. Today, we prove her right. The exhibition attracted national attention. News organizations covered Clara's story, emphasizing both the horrors she endured and the remarkable life she built afterward. Historians praised the research methodology Sarah and Marcus had employed, using digital enhancement technology, cross-referencing multiple archives across 2 continents, and partnering with descendants to ensure the story was told with dignity and accuracy. But the most meaningful outcome came when the Medical University of South Carolina, after reviewing Morrison's records, issued a formal apology for the institution's historical complicity in the medical exploitation of enslaved people. Dr. Patricia Chen announced the establishment of the Clara Thompson Scholarship Fund, providing full medical school scholarships for descendants of enslaved people. "We cannot undo the past," Chen said at the press conference, "but we can acknowledge it honestly and work toward a more just future. Clara deserved an apology 165 years ago. We offer it now, along with a commitment to train physicians who will never treat any human being as property or experimental material." Sarah and Marcus published their research in the Journal of American History, and their article became one of the most cited papers in Civil War-era studies. But more importantly, Clara's story entered educational curricula across the United States, teaching students about the human cost of slavery through one child's specific documented experience. In Monrovia, the Thompson family established the Clara Museum, housed in the original building where Ruth's Hope School had operated. The museum displayed Clara's writings, photographs, and artifacts, but also served as an active educational center, carrying forward her mission of teaching young women about their inherent dignity and worth. Josephine Williams became its director, ensuring that Clara's story would be preserved for future generations. 2 years after the discovery, Sarah received a letter from a woman in South Carolina named Ruth Anderson, an African-American genealogist who had been researching her own family history. Ruth had traced her ancestry to a woman named Ruth who had worked in the rice mills at Middleton Place, who had survived the Civil War and Reconstruction, who had lived until 1891. Family oral histories described this Ruth as a woman who had lost her daughter Clara to a slave sale in 1858 and had spent the rest of her life wondering what had happened to her child. Though absolute documentary proof remained elusive across the gulf of destroyed records and lost histories, the circumstantial evidence was compelling. Sarah shared this discovery with the Thompson family, and together they held a ceremony honoring both Clara and Ruth, the daughter who had been stolen and the mother who had never forgotten. Grace Thompson, now 94, held the 1858 photograph and spoke through tears. Today, Mama Ruth and Mother Clara are reunited in memory. If not in life, their separation was a crime, their love endured, and their story will never be forgotten. The photograph that had documented a child's commodification had become, instead, a testament to resilience, resistance, and the ultimate triumph of human dignity over dehumanization. Clara, once item 47 in an auction house ledger, once valued at $650, had proven herself invaluable. A teacher, a founder, a mother, and a woman whose life echoed across centuries as a reminder that every person has infinite worth that can never be bought, sold, or taken away.